Lasca Hirlock, and welcome Minister Darragh O'Brien to the House. I just want to speak on the Land Development Agency, and I've had a chance to look through the legislation. I think the basic objective of the Land Development Agency is a very good one. I suppose just a few observations I'd have to make, and the Minister will appreciate I'm from the constituency of Limerick City, where we've had Limerick regeneration. It's effectively, it was in its way a form of a mini LDA, and I suppose from the experience we had with the Limerick regeneration, I just want to make a few observations. Firstly, Minister, I think it's critical that it's a partnership model between the LDA and the councils. That did not happen in Limerick regeneration, and I believe consequently it wasn't as successful as one would have liked. So I think it's critical that there are memorandums of understanding, service level agreements, whatever is required to specifically deal with that there's no area of ambiguity in terms of the interaction of the LDA and the local authorities. We had an incident recently in Limerick where those waters became a bit muddied, and I believe it sent out a signal for me. It's critical that they're very much defined. I think secondly, I think, Minister, that within the legislation itself, it calls for its Section 8, and it speaks about that not later than the 31st of March 2024 and every 5 years thereafter, it shall furnish report to the Minister regarding progress towards achieving the purpose of this Act. There is a further section, Minister, where they have to deliver an annual report to you. I think they should be linked in. My personal view is that that should be done on a yearly basis. I think it's of such a critical nature. I think it will bring focus, if they're required, the LDA required, not only to give an update on the work they've done, but how they're meeting the objectives under the LDA legislation itself on a yearly basis. You may have views on that. I think it's just an observation again. The third thing is that the interaction, and colleagues have made reference to it, the legislation is silent on the role of the elected member in local authorities. It's come up, I'd say you're well aware of it. Exactly what role they have to play, as you well know, one of the functions that local members retain is the reserve function in terms of approval of disposal of lands. So how does that fit in terms of the relationship between the LDA and the local authority? I think you overcome that in large measure by the partnership model. So I think the members have to have a role. It's silent. It's a question that's coming up from the councillors themselves on quite a number of occasions, and it's just something maybe you might shed a bit of light as to exactly where that actually arises. Thirdly, I suppose I want to speak about what the role of the LDA is. And when you look at the purpose of the Act itself, I think its primary thing has to be about delivering housing. It has to be about delivering housing in a mixed-use model. It has to be a deliver housing that's not, obviously you want some form of cohesion in terms of number of units, but I think it must be done in a way that's sustainable. And if you have over the concentration of development, if we've learnt anything in Limerick from over the years, where we had large, huge volumes of housing in one location, it brought its own difficulties for the people living there. And I think that it's hugely important that it's obviously about getting houses built, but I think there's a fine line between something being rushed and something being delayed. It's about getting that balance correctly. So the elements for me are, it has to be about obviously social housing, which very much links in with the local authorities. It has to be about affordable housing, and the Minister will be well aware of my views on affordable housing. I liked the traditional model, which was that private estates had 10% affordable and 10% social. The social came back, the affordable didn't return. I think it's a very, very good model, sustainable model. There's no uncertainty. People know within an estate what's physically going into the estate. I think it's hugely important that if you have a housing estate of 200 houses, you know 20 of those are going to be affordable to young people and young couples at a level at which they can afford in their area. And I think it's something I feel very strongly about. I don't necessarily feel it's a model I personally would prefer rather than having all social, all affordable, all private. I think it's trying to find that model that's an integrated model without an over-concentration that people can work with. So, literally looking down through it, right, to enable measures to supply housing is not being utilised under Euro is made available for housing in the state. To counteract undue segregation housing between persons of different social background, and that's about the mix. New and regenerated well serviced by schools, public transport and public amenities. There has to be an interaction with the Department of Transport. To develop and regenerate relevant public lands for the purpose of delivery. What I feel, Minister, it's hugely critical. My view is, if a local authority is progressive and they're developing housing in a specific land area that they own, the LDA doesn't have a role. The LDA has a role where the existing state authorities are not progressive in providing housing. You don't want a situation where you may have turf wars over lands between the LDA and the local authority, and that's why I feel it's critical now to get those lines of demarcation, but very much in a partnership model and very much in a spirit of ensuring that as well that the local authorities and their role, the devil is in the detail, very much the elected members. You speak about the deficiencies in the housing market. There is a worry at the moment, Minister, that because with COVID, that it is leading to increase in the price of houses, and when we come out of COVID, for some couples, the price of housing will be beyond their capability. That's why the affordable model, in my view, has to kick in a big way as soon as possible within the existing estate, within any new estates being built, 10% of it, and also in terms of the more, I suppose, high-powered model of the LDA itself. We speak about then to support and consult the provision of publicly owned lands for development, expedite the most efficient use of such land. That has to be back to the partnership model with the local authorities. And you might answer me, Minister, will there be service level agreements or memorandums of understanding between the LDA and collective local authorities, or will it be based on individual agreements? How will it work in practice? Because the last thing we want here is where there are issues about who exactly owns or will get to develop such lands. We don't have in any way stagnation or standoffs between the LDA and the local authorities themselves. To establish to which economies of scale and efficiency makes absolute sense. Opportunity be made for efficient development of contiguous tracts of relevant absolutely makes sense. And commercial activities, including by generating funding required to perform its functions. I do, and to achieve the best possible social and economic return, Constitutional Purposes Act. Just a few aspects there. I note in the legislation, Minister, that the LDA, if they're disposing of land, development land, they're required to come back to you as Minister and seek your approval. However, if they're disposing of houses built, they're not required to do that. So, once again, how will that operate in practice? And that's why I believe, Minister, that under Section 8 of the Act, I think if they're to give you a report on how they're implementing, rather than just, I think with a little bit of tweaking, the annual report they're to give you could be tweaked to link in with Section 8. So they would be required, within that report to outline how they're dealing with the objectives of the Act itself, rather than having to deliver that in 2024, the first one, and then 5 years thereafter. I think it's something that I feel would be hugely important, because I think everyone believes that the Act itself, the LDA itself, is being brought forward for good purpose. But I suppose, in summary, for me, I welcome the legislation. I do have, from my experience with Limerick Regeneration, a few observations that I've made based on practical experience. That relationship between the LDA and the local authorities has to be defined clearly, has to have proper memorandums of understanding, it has to have proper service level agreements. My view is, if the local authority are progressive, there isn't a role for the LDA. The LDA is there to deal with situations where it's not being developed. Furthermore, I think it's hugely critical that the councillors have a role in a positive way in ultimately what we want to do here is we want to build houses in terms of dealing with people on housing waiting lists, in terms of dealing with people who may want to downsize, in terms of people, young couples and young people, for affordable housing, in terms of making a provision of private housing as well, but done in a way that's a sustainable model with proper public transport. And I suppose the feature I'd ask as well, Minister, is if the model becomes just about building 5- and 6-storey apartment blocks to get numbers up, my view is that model is not sustainable. The model should be a mix. Yes, we need apartments, but we also need townhouses, we need semi-detached houses, we need an integrated model. Over-concentration of any group, in my view, doesn't work in a proper way for society. The second thing, Minister, is we need to define clearly how you determine what's required to be approved by you as Minister and not. Development land that's being sold has to be approved by you. Equally, in terms of where there's houses built that do not require approval, the question is that it has to be clearly defined exactly what that means, so there's no ambiguity. And these are issues to ensure that we get a situation where we're looking at a place like where I represent, Limerick City, where you see sustainable development going, enhancing the size of the city, but enhancing it in a way, for instance, where National Transport Authority are coming back to us shortly with a revised Limerick metropolitan, Shannon area metropolitan transport strategy, which will link Limerick and Shannon Airport for the first time ever. They are now going to come back with a model which was not in the original draft, about setting up a rail system, an urban rail system with use of existing rail track. That has to feed into a housing model as well, and it has to feed into an infrastructure model. So if we're putting in housing, we must ensure, and I think we need to move towards a continental model, where in ways, Minister, that when you're looking at an LDA model, I personally would like to see the roads going in first. I'd like to see public amenities going in first. I'd like to see playgrounds going in first. I'd like to see that when the houses are built, the infrastructure is there. And for too often in the past, you certainly have large housing complexes built with no social amenities, and certainly we're doing catch-up. And I think that the LDA, in terms of a structured model, can certainly do an enormous amount of good in terms of not only building houses, but also ensuring that the infrastructure is in place at the same time the houses are built. And that we're coming back here in a short number of years, and I'm looking at Limerick City. I'm seeing an urban rail system up and running. I'm seeing playgrounds and parks where there's new housing complexes. I'm seeing linking into the city centre in terms of being able to walk in. I'm seeing park and ride. I'm seeing commercial activities. And equally, Minister, that LDA has a commercial remit as well. Who can it partner with? will they be required to come back? Where will the ministerial role fit in an approval in that area? And I think the key thing, the feature all the time here is working with a common purpose and ensuring there's no ambiguity around the relation between the councils and the LDA in a partnership model, ensuring that the elected members of local authorities clearly are made aware of what their role will be in the works that they do around the provision of housing for and local authority lands that are available in an area, because the LDA extends well beyond local authorities. It extends to virtually multiple agencies, which clearly, once again, Minister, will require service levels and memorandum of understanding. But these other bodies, in the main, Minister, are not involved in the provision of housing. That's the key defining feature and common feature between the LDA and the local authorities. So look, I wish you well with the legislation. What I'm pointing out is based on my experience, and I think you'll accept the regeneration in Limerick is probably the nearest micro model that you'll get in terms of the LDA. It wouldn't have all the elements of the LDA, but it was a body set up to deal with the regeneration of Limerick City in terms of taking control of the building of housing in that area. And I believe at the time not sufficient due diligence was done around defining the relationship and the respective roles between Limerick City and County Council and the regeneration itself. A lot of good work was done. However, there was elements of it that I think could have been avoided, and I think it could have even been a much more enhanced, a more successful programme. So, there are my comments, Minister. You'll take them in the spirit they were given, which is about ensuring that when the LDA is up and running, that he can go about its purpose without any degrees of uncertainty around its remit and its respective relationship with the local authorities and its members and the other respective bodies, and that we are coming back here with very much an integrated model in a number of years, and we're saying the LDA has been a resounding success. Thank you.